Welcome everyone to Felicity Banks Interactive Fiction Workshop. Felicity Banks is an author of multiple novels and interactive fiction, including the Antecedent Queen series. And you are currently kickstarting. Could you explain that?
Murder in the Mail.
Yeah.
Well, I'll never say no to an opportunity to plug my own work. Murder in the Mail basically came out of my physical publisher hearing how much I got paid for my interactive fiction. And so we had lots of discussions about this. And my physical publisher is Odyssey Books, odysseybooks.com.au. And they also have an imprint called Publisher Obscura, publisherobscura.com, which is specifically for beautiful visual books for grown-ups. So inspired by the visual artist side of things, and the idea of, apparently there's a Danish company that sends stories on postcards and things like that. Most people have heard of the hunter-killer things, where people send you a box and it's got all these clues about murders. That all turned into Murder in the Mail, which is a story told through the mail with letters, objects and artworks every week for 8 weeks. And it's a Kickstarter at the moment, which has the story, premium versions of the story, other awards and things like that.
So, do you want to introduce how you got into writing and then we can get started?
Yeah. Well, my name is Felicity Banks. I've been writing or trying to write since I was very young. I remember trying to write a novel when I was 7 years old, which I did not finish, shockingly. It was about cats. And spoiler alert, there were kittens at the end, which is the perfect end to every story, obviously. The first time I finished something fairly long was when I was 16. I wrote a novella for the inaugural Penguin Qantas Somerset College National Novella Writing Competition for school-age students. And I did not win the $20,000, but I placed fairly highly. And I thought, oh, I am awesome at this. I am going to make books and I'm going to sell them and it's going to be great. So that was when I was 16. And I had my first book published when I was 34. So, you know, it was a quick and easy process if you measure it in a really unusual way. My first book was Heart of Brass, the first book in the Antipodean Queen trilogy. The second book is Silver and Stone, and the third book is coming out later this year. I also have a children's series which starts with The Monster Apprentice, which was a relatively quick process. I wrote it only 10 years ago. And I also write a lot of interactive fiction, which is similar to choose your own adventure novels, but these days it's almost always released as a phone app. And for some reason, a lot of people feel more comfortable reading a book on their phone than they do physically reading a book. It's also got the choices, so a lot of people who don't consider themselves readers do consider themselves gamers. So they go, it's not a book, it's a game, and they come and play it, and they like it, usually. Every so often we get some kind of interesting reviews, like it's got too much text or something, which is fair enough, because one of the stories I've worked on is slightly longer than War and Peace. Usually you don't read the whole thing though, you take different paths through the story, but it's definitely novel length as an experience. I've worked for, or I know stuff about, several companies, so on my beautiful high-tech whiteboard there I've listed some of them, because they all have almost exactly the same name, so it's kind of hard to keep them all straight. And we'll go through some of those, talking about the similarities and the difference and what they look like to the reader/player. I'll talk about some of the writing conventions, and I'll talk about some of the technical stuff. Now, I am not good with computers. For example, I brought my own computer today, but didn't realize it didn't have a HDMI port. And after this session is finished, I will not remember the shape of a HDMI port. And that's the story of my life. I just am not that good with computers. However, I do a little bit of coding. for my interactive fiction. Now, some of it's with really, really simple systems like Twine, and some of it is relatively complicated but flexible, like Choice of Games. They use ChoiceScript, which is a tool that they've designed themselves. Is there anything else you want to say?
No, other than we should probably give you a warm round of applause since welcome, and then we can get started.
Okay. The first engine I'm going to have you all look at is Twine. Twine has been around for a few years now. It's called a GUI, G-U-I, Graphic User Interface, which means that it actually creates a story map for you, which makes things so much easier, because a lot of people think about interactive fiction and they picture like a wall just covered with paper and bits of string going everywhere. And Twine makes that wall for you, and it doesn't require physical string, which is really super handy. Twine is free, it's easy, it's designed for rank beginners. It takes about 30 seconds to learn. So before we do that, I'll get you to grab your trusty handouts, which are mostly just examples of the different ways to write interactive fiction. The first one is based on Choose Your Own Adventure novels, which most of us read in the 80s, at least a little bit, and most of us remember very fondly. They have that classic sort of red logo on the front, lots of gruesome deaths, what's not to love. Now, at the very top of your handout, it says that the writer's view and the reader's view is identical pending typesetting. So there's no code whatsoever. Obviously, it's printed in physical paper, you type it, what you type comes out on the page in the book. And there's a contest called the Windhammer Prize, which I'm very fond of, because I won it and that got me a job, which is great. And the Windhammer Prize is specifically designed for stories that can be printed on paper. So if you want to dip your toe into interactive fiction, but you don't want to use anything more complicated than a word program, then the Windhammer Prize is a great place to start. It's run by Australians, so you could use your Aussie spelling without getting told it's a typo. And the first prize is, I think, $300 Australian, which is not bad considering they usually only get 10 to 20 entries. So it's well worth exploring. Plus it's relatively short. It's actually limited to either 100 pages or 100 sections. So you can do a lot with 100 pages, but often a section will only be a few sentences long. And my winning story was, I think, 63 pages long and about 10,000 words, which in interactive fiction is relatively short because your story branches so much that you end up with quite short stories but a lot of words and options. That is very much one of the features of paper interactive fiction. Apparently the average story length for those Choose Your Own Adventure novels is 8 pages. And the reason for that is that it branches in what they call a fan shape. So you might only have 2 choices every time, but they're completely different. They might even be different genres. So one might be horror, one might be romance, and you get completely different stories. And then those branch 2 more times. And those branches are completely different, and you very quickly end up with about 20, 30, or a million different endings. One of the great things about digital fiction is that you can make quite subtle changes, like you might only change a sentence in a paragraph, but that sentence can change the whole feeling of a story. In fact, even a sentence can sometimes change the entire genre of a story. For example, if your story ends up at the prom, it could be a romance. It could be Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which usually ends in fire and staking. It could be horror, like Carrie. All these things. But the first couple of sentences might be exactly the same. You've got dresses, you've got balloons, you've got music, you've got boys and girls liking or not liking each other in various intricate combinations, and from there anything can happen. Choose Your Own Adventure novels, one of the really distinct things about them is they're written in second person. you wake up, you go left, you go right, which is quite jarring to modern readers as a rule. But some interactive fiction, the digital kind, also uses second person. In these choose your own adventure novels, death is likely. You die a lot. And I found through personal experience, writing a lot of interactive fiction, that sometimes I would have a single story with about 5 possible character deaths. But because the reader chooses their personality and their skills and so forth, I would have to write about 6 different options for every death. So I'd end up writing like 30 death scenes for a relatively non-violent story. So I am trying to kill less of my characters these days, because it's a bit of a pain to write their death in 6 different ways every time. Okay, moving on to Twine, which is on the next page. Now, the Twine website is twinery.org, which is written there at the top. Twine is not connected to any company. A lot of the tools used for interactive fiction are specific to a company, but actually that's starting to change, because one of the companies that I've actually listed here actually asks you to send in a writing sample using Twine. So they want you to know Twine, and then presumably they add on some extra coding bits themselves. But Twine is so ubiquitous now that that it's starting to get used by the big companies rather than inventing their own. And then they'll invent a bunch of JavaScript or whatever that they'll put on top to take your quite simple story and turn it into something that's complicated and unique in a good way. So let's learn Twine. This is what the website looks like, twinery.org. I tend to use it online, so I click on Use it online. I haven't written any stories in this particular one, so it says 0 stories. I want to start a story, I click on plus story, which is the big green button there. Oh, I can name the story, so I'm going to name it example. And it doesn't really matter what I call it because I can change it, which is nice. So this is what you get. You get this blue kind of grid, and it says untitled passage. And you double click this passage to edit it, like so. And then it gives you like some basic instructions there. You wake up. Nope. Yep. So you guys are uni students, which is why nope is first. And to turn it into an interactive story rather than 5 words, you find your square brackets on your computer and you put 2 square brackets around your options. You have just written an interactive story. So you click back on the sort of beside the passage or at the cross. Voila! This is what your story structure looks like. And they've even named the boxes for you. One is nope and one is yep. You sleep forever. The end. You wake up. Piano falls on you. The end. There you go. You have 2 fairly different stories already. And from there you can go on and branch more. You can, if you go into each of these nope and yep sections and you put square brackets around something that's the same, the end. Okay, that just created a box called the end. There it is. And if I put double brackets around here, then it will go to the same box. Ooh, very nice. And one of the lovely things about modern interactive fiction is you don't have to have that classic fan shape where everything keeps going to completely different passages. You can go out and then come back in. So they call that a branch and bottleneck structure, and it saves your mind in amazing and wonderful ways. And it doesn't make the story less interesting. It actually makes it deeper and richer, because you can make those minor alterations based on the previous choices and things like that. So this box here, the end, that would be your bottleneck, except that the story ends there so it doesn't keep going. Usually after a bottleneck, you would branch out again and then bottleneck back again. And I will tell you that bottlenecking is the hard part, branching is the easy part. It's really hard to take your story off in different directions and then bring it back. One of the simplest ways to do that is with time. You wander off and kill a dragon, you go to maths class, and in both of those scenarios, you'll eventually probably want to eat dinner, and so you can bottleneck at that. Or night falls, or something like that, because in almost any story that you tell, there will be day and night, and there will be food. So those are some easy bottlenecks to keep your story under control so it doesn't end up being millions and millions of words long. So that's Twine. You guys could literally take it from there and write a 600,000 word story if you wanted to. However, usually you do get a bit more complicated than that, and I would not recommend Twine for a 600,000 word story, because soon those little boxes start really getting crowded, and they're so small or so big that you can't get a sense of the whole story. One solution to that is to have kind of chapters and do one chapter and then another chapter and then another chapter, and I literally don't know how to link the chapters, but I do know it's possible. Twine, when you play the story, which you can test yourself, basically you get a blank screen, you get words, and then your links will be highlighted. And then you could literally click on the links to take you to what happens next. And if we click on the end, we get the pre-existing text because we haven't put anything in there yet. Okay, so another thing that's really great about modern interactive fiction is what they call delayed branching. With delayed branching, you have decisions early in the story that make a big difference later in the story, and you also have statistics. I know it sounds like maths. So what you can do without doing any actual adding or multiplication is you can decide, okay, well, it's going to make a big difference in my prom story if my character is really, 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 really wanting a scholarship, or if he or she really, 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 really wants to go out with the popular girl. And so along the way, you'll have things like you are walking down a hallway and you see the most popular girl in school. And then you have two decisions. And one of them might be, oh my goodness, she's never going to talk to me. And the second choice is, beauty is so fleeting, but a scholarship is going to be awesome, or something like that. And that might not change the fact that she ignores you as you walk past, so your next bit of the story will look like nothing has changed, but the program will record what you said in a statistical way, and it will go, okay, we have 1 point for either likes the popular girl or really wants a scholarship. And the thing is, your reader might actually want to get with the popular girl and get a scholarship. And that's good, because that frustrates them and makes it harder for them to make a decision. So good interactive fiction has difficult choices. Probably the most difficult choice I ever wrote was in a story where there was a male and a female love interest. You got to know them over literally months of time because the story was just released week by week. And then you finally met the girl's father, and he was killed by vampire-like creatures. And so you needed to kill him before he killed other people. But the girl begged you not to hurt him. So you had a choice of killing her father in front of her, lying to her and saying, I will totally not kill him, and then waiting till she left and killing him, or leaving him alive. And that's never going to be an easy choice. And if you did leave him alive, there were consequences later. So that's a really good example of a difficult choice. Most of the choices that use statistics are about personality or skills. So if every time your character sees the popular girl, they're stuttering and playing with their hair and freaking out and wishing she would talk to them, then you'll develop that plot line. And if every time they hear about scholarships, they're doing extra study and preparing essays and working hard, then that makes them more likely to get the scholarship in the end. And often you have an ending that is very, very different. Like there are 4 completely distinct, different genre endings, like your prom scenario. If this person gets to be homecoming king with the popular girl, but what they really wanted was a scholarship, they'd be devastated, and vice versa. And also, often in the end, the gaming side of interactive fiction comes in, where you need to make a choice based on your skills. So if your character has been learning karate through the entire story, and then someone insults them at the dance and they decide to fight them, they'll probably win. But if they've spent the entire time mooning over the popular girl, and then someone's rude to the popular girl and they challenge them to a fight, they'll probably lose the fight, but they might still get the girl. So that is a very rough, biased overview of ChoiceScript, which is done by a company called Choice of Games. It's a US company. They're the reason I got into interactive fiction, because this is their main site. We're looking for writers. That's permanently there. Learn more. Blah, 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 blah. Oh, look, money. So there are 2 options for a contract: 25% royalties and a $7,500 advance, or going down the page a little bit to here, 10% royalties and a $10,000 advance. So first of all, that's a lot of money, and you would be given that money based on an outline, and then you're paid in installments as you write the story. There's a few reasons for that. First of all you have to do is write an outline, so you don't have to learn ChoiceScript. You can just send them a concept, and then they'll say, okay, yeah, now can you flesh it out? So I've had a story accepted through here, which is great, and my sweet little concept paragraph turned into a 10,000 word outline, but it's still just an outline. Now, I know ChoiceScript, but if I didn't know ChoiceScript, I didn't need to know it to get accepted. I could actually write the whole outline, get accepted, and then bother to learn ChoiceScript. One of the main reasons they pay in installments, which you'll find in a lot of companies, is that, yes, it's hard to finish a novel. I mean, I think a lot of us in this room know that it's hard to finish a novel, and yes, there is an extra layer to writing an interactive novel. For one thing, if you do your code incorrectly, like if you leave out one square bracket in your Twine story, it won't work. So you will spend time finding errors, and sometimes the error will be that you put a space instead of a tab, and it will be really super annoying. However, you've all done editing, you've all agonized over whether a comma belongs there or not, Oxford comma forever, and it's not going to kill you, but it is an extra layer of difficulty. So that's why one reason they pay in installments is because they want you to keep writing, they want you to finish, and a lot of people don't. Other people take years and years to finish, which is fair enough. I mean, there are people who take 10 years to write a novel, and there's other people that take 6 weeks to write a novel. And as a rule, the ones that take 6 weeks will earn more than the others. Tim Winston is one of the exceptions. I'm quite a fast writer. I met many of you because we were doing July NaNoWriMo, or NaNoWriMo, because that's actually fairly similar to my normal pace when I'm writing the first draft. And that's good because readers like a lot of words. So imagine if you read a book and it was this thick, like a normal book, and then it turned out that half the pages were blank. You'd feel pretty annoyed. And one of the most common reviews is too short. And this will often be a review for books that are 100,000, 200,000 words long because they have different paths through the story. And sometimes you get a path that's relatively short. And even if you get an exactly average length path, if your book's 100,000 words, your read through might be between 20 and 50,000 words, which is actually really short for a book. So it is challenging to find the difference between having replayability, which means the next time they read the book they get a different experience, and having length. So some people solve that by just writing a lot, and that's probably the most straightforward solution, although obviously not the easiest to implement because some of us sleep occasionally. At the top of your sheet on choice of games, it's got an example of what the writer's view looks like. I'll just give you a quick example of what the reader looks like. In almost all interactive fiction, including choice of games, the beginning is free, which is another thing that reviewers sometimes freak out about because it's listed as a free app. Most of them are released as apps, but it's not actually a free app. It's a free beginning. And so some people will always get annoyed at the usually about $5 that it costs to buy the whole story. And that's fair enough because I think most people don't want to fall into the trap of in-app purchases. And yes, companies are semi-innocent in this regard because there's no simple way to say this is like a book where the beginning's free and then you've got to pay for the rest. It just doesn't quite work in the app system. But also companies are getting in on the beautiful money-sucking goodness of in-app purchases. In fact, I know some companies are deliberately doing things where, for example, some of the paths are free, but the really cool paths you do have to pay a few bucks for. So you can get to an okay ending without paying, but if you want to get the really good ending, then you are going to be sinking more money into it. So that's a trap to watch out for as readers and something to be aware of as writers. Anyway, this is what choice of games always looks like. It's very, very simple. You get a choice to buy it or play now for free. And it's also on Steam, the App Store, Google Play and Amazon, or you can just play it on your PC if you like. That's cool. And you fundamentally choose something. Oh, there's a little bit of graphics here. That's quite unusual. Usually there's no graphics, no music, no sound in choice of games. One of their favourite lines that they say is it's fueled by the vast, unstoppable power of your imagination. And I quite like that because obviously I come from books. So books are words. There's no sound effects in a book. There's rarely illustrations. So I love that in its own way. And you just click on which choice you want and then go next. And it also has a stats screen, so you can actually see what your stats are. So you can actually make a choice and then have a look and see if it made a difference. So name is picture with no name. Almost always in choice of games you'll be able to choose your name, so they've obviously put that there as a stand-in, a little joke. Peak fastball velocity, it started at 90, so that will go up or down depending on whether you practice in the story. And it won't be as simple as, yes, I would like a faster fastball. It will be, do you want to practice your fastball or see your boy or girlfriend? Because the choices have to be difficult and costly. Now, one of my absolute favourite things about choice of games is they have these opposed statistics. So the ones with the red and blue, as you become more stylish, you become less serious. As you become more intimidating, you get less relaxed. And designing those statistics is just the most beautiful headache, because if you think of like old style role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons, they had things like beauty and strength and stuff. But if you put beauty versus strength, that doesn't actually make sense. And it particularly doesn't make sense if you put intelligence versus beauty or something like that, that yes, you would think that was the case in a lot of books, but the correlation doesn't actually work. And you need to think about statistics that actually do oppose each other, but they're both useful. And that, again, makes the choices difficult. And it's really fun to write. I had a pirate game called Scarlet Sails, and one of my statistics was sobriety versus drunkenness. So if your sobriety was higher, you tended to do better in a fight. But if your drunkenness was higher, you could beat people in drinking matches. So they were both valuable. In fact, I had a whole lot of statistics in that one, and one of them was about honesty. I can't remember what they actually were, but it was whether you were more truthful or more of a liar. And that was the hardest one to make beneficial because obviously if you're a really good liar and it's a pirate story, then people will believe you. But if you tell the truth a lot, people will also believe you because of your reputation, if they know you well enough. So those are really tricky to work with, but really rewarding. One of the statistics I've seen is disdain. It was in a dragon game, and if you were like, I'm hungry, I'm going to just eat some villagers, then your disdain score would go up, and you would be more dragonish as a result, and people just loved that, because it's not something you would necessarily think of. Now, the bigger the company, the more you get paid, the more you'll need to adjust to their style. So with my current outline that was accepted for a choice of game story, it took 6 months going back and forth, starting with a paragraph, and they said, that sounds good, but not sure about that element. So I'd try a different way of it, and then we'd keep going, and then when they were sort of satisfied with the basic story, they'd say, okay, now can you outline some of the statistics and how they would work in the story, some of the choices that you would make. We want these 6 different types of choices. Ones that are based on not just what skills you have, but why, things like that. And some of their rules are your endings should be about 85% positive. So people might get the girl but not quite get the scholarship, but they've got a good contact in the governor's office or something useful. So they're like, I feel quite satisfied with that, but I wonder if I could have done better. And that makes them play it again. Logically consistent between strands. Now this is a real departure from the classic Choose Your Own Adventure books, because they went off in really weird random directions. Whereas in Choice Script, if your choice is something that takes time, and then immediately after that everyone's eating dinner, everything should take about the right amount of time, the same amount of time, that kind of thing. It shouldn't be stuff like in one choice you have magic and in another choice you're a mad scientist, unless you have a magical mad scientist world, because usually those things do belong in universes that are not just different genres, but they have different rules of how they work. So unless that's the whole deal with your game, you would want your magical system to be consistent throughout the story. Bottlenecks are crucial in Choice Script. Basically, their system is you have maybe about 10 chapters, and each chapter basically has the same setting, e.g. you're going to the prom, but the way you travel through that setting is very different. For instance, on a normal school day, do you wake up and go to your first class? Or do you try desperately to sleep in? Or do you just skip that class altogether and go play football? You know, those are three really different people reacting to the same fact of there being a school day. And they would all be tracked, and they would all influence your skills and your reputation and your relationships later on. Okay. When I first tried to write a scene in ChoiceScript, it took me, I think about an hour with some crying, but an hour is not too bad. I'm fairly good at like human languages, and so in some ways I think of it as a language, just a slightly different way of saying the same thing. And you use a few symbols, hashtag, asterisk, and straight quotation marks, and a bit of plus, minus, and percentage, which actually, I won't go into it now, but it actually stops you doing maths. It does the maths for you, which is great. But a normal person could probably have a scene running in ChoiceScript in about depending on their level of computer competency, between 5 minutes and half an hour. Now let's go to this. This is also in your handbook. Now, I have very dark motivations for bringing this up because Tin Man Games is a wonderful Australian company, and you should all read their stuff, especially the ones I've written. But it's actually really hard to get hired by them. I got hired by them because I won the Windhammer competition, which is loosely linked to them. And the Tin Man Games has the rights to digitally produce stories from the Windhammer competition. So I emailed them to ask if they wanted to use the rights. And they emailed back, obviously feeling quite guilty, saying, well, we've discovered that we actually lose money if we do that. So although we have the rights, we're probably not going to use them. Sorry. And I was like, oh, that's fine. Then they called me 2 hours later and said, would you be interested in writing for us? Because they just realized that KG Tan, who designed the Choices That Matter app and was half the writing team on And the Sun Went Out, is a really, really good programmer. So they didn't want him spending time writing when he could be doing harder stuff. And so they needed another writer to take his place. And that's where I came in. This one, And the Sun Went Out, is 600,000 words long. It's near future sci-fi. It's a lot of fun. This character over here, the little face you can see, this is a character called Moti, short for Moticon. And he's an AI that can learn, that looks exactly like an Apple Watch. So Apple really liked the fact that we'd thought of something you can do with an Apple Watch. So they often advertised it. And this character grew and changed throughout the story. He's got a very, very simple animation. He's got about, I think, 8 different facial expressions, which are all very short little animations and simple. It's got music you can turn on and off. It's got a few like really basic sound effects. And I think it looks quite beautiful on the black screen with the white writing. They do have a dyslexic friendly font, which is pretty cool. And you can turn off the sounds as well. And then in the other 2 stories, the bear and the squiggle are also characters in the story that can talk to you through your Apple Watch. Although I wrote all of And Their Souls Were Eaten, and basically this app was an experiment. So Tin Man Games got a Film Victoria grant for $40,000, and as a result I got to write another story for them. which was that one. And then it was nearly scraping by financially, and so they've got a third story, and lately it's doing quite well, so they're going to do another 2 stories. So obviously I have a very soft spot for this. This was the most I'd ever been paid for a story, although my story And Their Souls Were Eaten was 400,000 words, which I wrote in about a year, so it did nearly kill me, but totes worth it. So that's Two Men Games for you, which shows you just a different kind of aesthetic that you can use. They have their own specific tool, which it's not worth bothering to learn, because if in the future you write for them, they'll tell you how to use it. And finally, as it says on my lovely whiteboard, there's an American company called Big Fish, which has a section called 3-minute games. Don't believe the name, it's a dirty lie. They take much longer than 3 minutes, which is great. And they've got a very famous story series called Lifeline, where a person called Taylor has crashed on an isolated moon. Probably everyone in her spacecraft has died. She needs food, water, shelter, and to get off this moon and survive. And through some kind of communication glitch, the only person she can talk to is you. So it's really interesting because you are not the character, Taylor is the character. And in fact, sometimes she's an unreliable narrator. And they have timing breaks, basically, to mess with your mind, which make it an incredibly addictive experience. So she'll do things like, you'll advise her whether to walk towards an unusual structure in that direction or something in that direction. And she'll say, okay, I'm going to walk for a while. I think it'll take me about an hour to get there. And then it just says, Taylor is busy. Oh, her gender is never specified, but I think of her as female. So an hour passes, and it still says Taylor is busy. Then it's an hour and 5 minutes, an hour and 10 minutes, and then after over 2 hours, Taylor comes back and says, oh, that took longer than I thought. It's like, I thought you died. And it's great. It's one of the things that's really interesting about it is that Taylor has quite a developed personality. One of the things you often find yourself doing is writing a character who's a blank slate, and then as they make decisions, that builds up their personality. But Taylor, oddly enough, because she's not the reader but influenced by the reader, she can have a whole eccentric personality of his or her own. And actually, it works surprisingly well. And the timing breaks, for me, they made me such a rude person. I just couldn't stop checking my phone to see if she'd said something. And even when it said things like Taylor is asleep, which usually meant you wouldn't hear from her for at least 6 hours, sometimes you would, because sometimes she was attacked in her sleep. And it was really stressful and fantastic. And there's a whole series with her and a few others by the same company. And they are looking for writers at the moment. Now, they don't specify an amount. They do say they have competitive pricing. And the amount that Choice of Games give people, the $7,500 to $10,000, is very well known. And I believe that this company probably pays a similar amount based on their claim that their payments to authors are competitive. However, I can't say anything for certain. As you can see from the screen, they have artwork now. So that's a kind of interesting direction that they're taking. They're going further in the gaming direction, and it's quite lovely artwork, so it's nice to look at. And I probably can't really say more than that about them, but it's probably worth exploring them if you're writing something novel length, or you would like to write something novel length. And interestingly, if you scroll down a little bit, it says, please provide us with a writing sample using Twine 2. So they've decided, I don't know how they wrote the original Lifeline stories, but At the moment, they're looking for people who are moderately fluent in Twine 2, which does take about 10 minutes to be an expert, but that's pretty cool. So the barrier to getting into interactive fiction in terms of computer skills is dropping severely because of Twine. It was invented by Chris Klimas, and he's now a member of a not-for-profit organisation called the Interactive Fiction Technology Foundation, IFTF, which has a lot of really cool people in it, working hard to just continue making the community better. They do things like helping a lot with the IF Comp. Now, the IF Comp, Interactive Fiction Comp, happens in the second half of each year. It's a big deal in the community. I've gotten 3 job offers because of a story that placed 7th in 2015 out of 53. Now, unfortunately for all of you, because the IFTF is raising money to pay people large amounts in prizes and to support sort of all the running of the entire system and forum and reviews and stuff that happens at that time of year, more people are entering. I think there was something like 80 last year. So when I entered in 2015, 53 was the record, and it's jumped significantly since then. But it's really well worth trying, especially if choice of games doesn't work for you. Because choice of games, you know what you'll get, whereas the IF Comp, I hate to say it, but what you mostly get is exposure. Now, you do usually get some cash if you're in basically the top half of entries, but there is, there's a lot of really public reviewing, some of which is extremely funny, some of which is very critical and can be hard to take, especially when it's funny at the same time. Some of it is wildly unprofessional and random, but a lot of it is really excellent critique that happens to be public. So if you can deal with that kind of thing, which I believe everyone in UC Writers can absolutely do because you critique each other, you're used to it, IF Comp is fantastic. Length makes a difference too. Stories that score highly tend to be quite long. They need to be games that can be played in under 2 hours. You can enter a longer game, but people are allowed to judge it based on the first 2 hours. The IF Comp is also a funny mixture of my kind of IF, which is very narrative focused, where you can't get stuck because there's always a button to push, and Parser IF, where there are puzzles. I suck at Parser IF. I am remarkably stupid in that area. Usually if I attempt Parser, I end up crying. I don't cry all the time, just when I'm trying to figure things out that I can't. I have read some really enjoyable Parser games, usually with a walkthrough, so that I didn't get stuck. And there are some really good games out there. Back in the day, in the days of Zork and all of those games, part of the fun was getting stuck and being tormented for days over a puzzle and then finally going, what if I feed the dragon to the rooster and then put the rooster into the pit? Maybe that will fix it. And the joy of solving puzzles like that. So if you enjoy being tormented by puzzles, Parser IF is a great way to go. Also, all of the IF Comp is publicly judged. Now, luckily for the entire world, it's not a popularity contest. And it is judged pretty fairly. And also there are very smart people looking after it. And if you have to review at least 5 stories for your votes to be counted, which is a good barrier to trolls. But all of that statistical information is obvious to the people who run things. And so if you've given a story 5 or 10 stars and then 4 other stories 1 star, they're going to be suspicious. And so they do a really good job of making sure it doesn't turn into a popularity contest. One of the problems they have had is with choice script, because Choice of Games is such a big influencer that there was an incident where quite a good story did probably arguably better than it should have, because a bunch of people who love choice script came over and it was familiar and easy for them, and so they voted for it kind of more highly than they probably should have. And actually, the people that run Choice of Games, which is a surprisingly small team, are also active on the Int fiction forums, which are very closely linked to the IFComp, and they kind of deliberately don't mention the IFComp in the Choice of Games forums because they know how much influence they have and they're trying to make sure that doesn't happen. My game was a choice script game, but if I was going to enter again, I wouldn't use choice script because I'd feel like it gave me an unfair advantage. I have entered it again since then with a Twine game, and I'll actually, I'll actually show you that Twine game. Incorrect. There are lots of free hosting sites which are really, really fantastic. This is one of them that specializes in Twine games. Basically, you convert your Twine game to a HTML file, then you drag and drop it on the website. And if you don't know what I'm saying, don't worry, because I didn't the first time I did it. But anyone who can save something as HTML will know enough to help you. Now this is actually IFDB, the Interactive Fiction Database. It's got all my beautiful stories on. And let's see, Stuff and Nonsense. And star ratings. And there are, one of the things about the interactive fiction community is they are extremely generous in their reviews. Especially around the IFComp, but even generally, people are really good at reviewing new games without asking anything in return, which is fantastic. So as you can see, you can put a picture in there. I changed the background. These are my things in the double brackets. You can go to credits and notes, and there's more pictures. There's links in there to take you to places that I got pictures from, probably legally. Oops. And the story has this cool thing on the side, which you can click on that and it tells you what all the magical metals do. And as you acquire magical metals, they turn to italics. So you can do quite complicated things with that. In fact, one of the reviews I got for that said they thought I built this engine myself. They didn't recognize it as Twine, which is actually kind of cool because people do respect technical expertise. My friend did that for me, obviously. It is possible to do. This box on the side is effectively like the stats screen on choice script. I mean, that's pretty much how I used it. So for that reason, it's a lot easier to use choice script for a story with statistics. So you don't have to have this much code on every section because choice script makes it quite simple. Okay. Oh, and on the last page of your notes, it's got a bunch of places for you to go after this workshop, to learn by playing, to learn by reading blogs of reviewers, to learn by community. There are two really good ones. The Choice of Games forums are particularly good and particularly welcome. So much so that on a couple of occasions over the last few years, I've accidentally offended people. And other people have taken me aside in private messages and said, look, you really hurt so-and-so's feelings. I assume you didn't do it on purpose. You need to publicly apologise. And I've publicly apologised and everything's fine. But they're so not open to trolling. You just don't get trolled there. You get welcomed there, you get included. Yes, you probably get opinionated arguments, but I don't think anyone has ever hurt my feelings. They're just fundamentally good people. Lots of Americans, of course, and I think Americans have different standards of politeness. Australians are just more relaxed, which can be rude, and Americans are more polite / sensitive. So different but equal, but it is worth being a little bit aware of some of the political stuff going on in America and some of the racist things that are just not a thing in Australia, but are a thing in America, if possible. And if you don't, and you do offend someone, someone will most likely politely, privately tell you that you've done something wrong and how to fix it, which is actually really special. One of the other really great things about interactive fiction and choice of games in particular is they are deliberately and consciously diverse. So the gaming community as a whole can be quite sexist, quite homophobic, stuff like that, but not interactive fiction. Interactive fiction swings in the other direction. In choice of games, if you want to be on their good label, you have to allow the main character to be male or female, gay or straight. So you can't say just have a male character in your story. They have to be allowed to be at least male or female, and increasingly often people allow at least one other gender, sometimes more, so that whoever you are as a reader, male, female, gay, straight, asexual, as much as possible, you are catered for in these stories. And that kind of determination to be diverse permeates the whole forum. I'd say, well, most of the time I don't know what someone's gender is. When I do happen to find out someone's gender, I would say it's probably about 50-50 male-female, with a good chunk of people who don't identify as either male or female. There's a lot of people openly talking about mental illness and other disabilities. It's just a really excellent internet community, even without the whole interactive fiction side. And they have a lot of good story discussions too, like how do you get over the problem of having a character who's a blank slate? How do you make them interesting? If you have a romance option with a non-player character, how do you make the non-player character have some form of agency so they're not just a kind of cardboard cutout character or effectively a sex doll? And these are discussions that people have that are really interesting. I've also got a bunch of other tutorial notes on my blog. I've done a tutorial similar to this, I think about 3 times, and every crowd is a bit different. The first one I did, everyone had a go at Twine, and then another one I did, everyone was into choice groups. So the one on Twine, I talked more about stylistic elements, like often using second person, often having a character who's a blank slate, things like that. Whereas in the choice group one, I talked about, okay, since you have to have the option of being a male main character or a female main character, how do you do that with code? And fortunately, there is a very simple way, which I didn't realize the first time I wrote a novel into a script. And so every time I needed to use a pronoun, I would have an either or thing. So I'd have one paragraph where the person was male, one paragraph where they were female, and it was messy and ugly. And it's actually really simple to fix, even with more than 2 genders. One thing to keep in mind, if you do have more than 2 genders, is that grammar is slightly different for they. So he walks up a hill, she walks up a hill, they walk up a hill. So you have to catch odd little grammatical things like that. You also usually have a lot of beta readers and testers, because in a single read through they might only see like 20% of the story, so it's a bit hard for catching errors. So for example, in iOS comp, there's usually about 15 testers, and they're acknowledged up front. In a novel, you often acknowledge people in the back. In interactive fiction, it's usually on like a cover page. And it's a very big part of the community is acknowledging the people that have beta tested it, because goodness knows they're not paid, usually. Let's see. Okay. I would say choice of games is the easiest way to get into paid interactive fiction if you write novel-length pieces. Choice of games is slowly getting longer and longer. So it used to be the standard story was minimum of 60,000 words. Now I think the minimum is 120,000 words, because the longer it is, the better a story it is. The more options there are, the more you get into the story. Things like that. And of course, the longer your story is, the more people will probably like it in reviews as well. And the reviews, like the public reviews on iTunes and particularly Google Play, it's actually much easier to leave a review on Google Play, so you get more there, like by a factor of 1,000. And if your game is long and deep, your average reviews will be higher. Just looking through my notes. There's another really cool contest called the Spring Thing, which is kind of easier for beginners. And there's a competition called Intercomp, where you submit games that are not finished, which is cool because you don't have to finish them. You can submit them to the game with maybe the first chapter or something, as long as it's playable. And then people can basically say, you really should finish this, or I couldn't figure out this game at all, I don't think it makes sense, which is great. I don't think they have prizes for Intercomp, but again, you get a lot of public reviews and stuff, which is very valuable. The other place that's a really good hub for interactive fiction is itch.io, which is a whole gaming website. They have gaming jams all the time, and so they might have a gaming jam which goes for a month, and the theme is Through the Rabbit Hole. That was a game jam that I entered. Most of the game jams are just for fun, and then you read each other's games for fun. On itch.io, you can publish it with a price tag. So if you decide your game is worth $1, then you can say, my game is worth $1, and then people have to pay $1 to play it. It hosts a lot of different tools. I would imagine Twine is definitely among them, but I haven't physically tried it out. I'd be shocked if it wasn't. And some of the game jams will have little prizes or something. So one that I entered, it was the first time I got any public feedback on my games, and they had a long list and then a short list and then winners. And it was really good to kind of see where I fell among the games and to look at some of the other games and see what they did well and what they did badly, because you learn a lot by critiquing other people's games. So itch.io, because the game jams are often a limited period of time, they don't usually go novel length, so it's a really good way to dip your toe into the water any time of year. Blah, blah, blah. Usually physical descriptions tend to be either sparse or fast, but sometimes people are increasingly thinking, okay, how can we include non-Caucasians in the story? So they might give you a choice of, you know, I'm Caucasian looking, I'm Asian looking, I'm African looking, I'm Islander looking, or whatever. Now that gets tricky fast, because if you forget a major racial type, that's really sad. But as a rule, people appreciate you giving it a go, and you will have beta testers who usually one of them would flag something if it made them uncomfortable or if they thought you were missing something. In the story that I've got approved with Choice of Games, my main character was born with no legs, mostly because I wanted her to have a tail prosthetic, because prosthetics are cool. And her best friend and quite a few minor characters are deaf, which in America is a rude word and in Australia is the standard term, which I discovered. And one of the things they'll do is the company will hire sensitivity readers to check that I haven't horribly screwed up my descriptions of these characters. For example, in Australia, saying, this character is deaf is a statement of fact. It's not insulting. Being deaf shouldn't be an insult because it doesn't make you stupid or ugly or anything. But in America, I think they use hearing impaired. And actually in the story itself, you don't tend to use any term because she's just around doing stuff and, she's talking, she's signing, but it's not actually a big deal inside a story. Certainly one of the most challenging things for me is writing diverse characters properly. That's never not going to be a challenge, and it's never not going to be worthwhile. And it's never not going to be required in interactive fiction because it's a really good community and that's part of it. One of the odd experiences when you read choice script in particular, but any interactive fiction that has some kind of statistics, is that there's usually a way to lose. Now, if you lose, maybe you die, it should be an epic death, something that's enjoyable to read. So you know that technically you failed the story, but you don't mind because it's still a great story. But when it's that kind of game, which Choice of Games always is, part of what you're figuring out along the way is how their statistics work, how their brain works. A lot of the time, the best thing to do is to specialize. So I think I gave an example of if you learned a lot of karate, you could win a fight at the prom. And if you didn't learn a lot of karate, you might lose the fight but win the girl. So you often have the experience that at the climax of the story, you have a problem and there are 3 very different ways to solve it. And you need to choose the one that's right for your character. I think in Scarlet Sails, I had a couple of pivotal choices. And one of the things you could do is be moderately good at everything. And actually that's relatively unusual in Choice of Games because usually the best thing to do is specialize. As a reader, interactive fiction is part of the experience is frustration because you get the illusion of total freedom, but you don't actually have total freedom. And as a writer, you're trying not to frustrate people, but at the same time you are frustrating them because they can never do everything. So it's this funny kind of middle ground where they have much more power than a reader of a normal novel, but in some ways less power because you're still dictating the things. And actually that's worse for parser fiction. A lot of traditional parser fiction gives you a blank page and you type things like walk north, walk south. Now, I know, due to my own terrible lack of skills in this area, that if you don't know your set of verbs then that are actually going to get you a result, then you're stuck. Not only do you have a blank page, but you can't get to the story. So the freedom is an illusion. But hopefully, as a writer, you will be able to think, okay, I want this story to be enjoyable to men, enjoyable to women, enjoyable to people that love snowboarding and people that love embroidery? How will I put the right choices in so that they're all happy?